Of Civil Government, the Second Treatise by John Locke, a work of political philosophy first published in 1690. The principal ideas of which are: in the state of nature all men are free and equal. No man is by nature sovereign over other men. The law of nature governs the state of nature. Reason reveals the law of nature, which is derived from God. In the state of nature no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. And if anyone does harm another, the one he harms has the right to punish him. By his labour a man acquires as his property the products of his labour. In order to remedy the inconveniences resulting from a state of nature in which every man is judge of his own acts, men enter into a contract, thereby creating a civil society empowered to judge men and to defend the natural rights of men. If a government violates the social contract by endangering the security and rights of its citizens, it rebels against the people, and the people have the right to dissolve the government. The glorious revolution of 1688 saw the expulsion of James II from the throne of England, and the triumph of rigged principles of government. James had been accused of abandoning the throne and thus violating the original contract between himself and his people. 2 years later, Locke's Of Civil Government, the Second Treatise, came out, and was looked upon by many as a tract which justified in philosophical terms those historical events. The first treatise had been an argument against the view that kings derive their right to rule from divine command, a view held by the Stuarts, especially James I, and defended with no little skill by Sir Robert Filmer in his Patriarcha 1680. From a philosophical point of view, it is of little consequence whether Locke intended his defence of the Revolution to apply only to the events in the England of his day or to all men at any time. Certainly we can study his principles for what they are and make up our own minds as to the generality of their scope. After rejecting Filmer's thesis, Locke looked for a new basis of government and a new source of political power. He recognized that the state must have the power to regulate and preserve property, that to do so it must also have the right to punish, from the death penalty to all lesser ones. In order to carry out the laws passed, the force of the community must be available to the government, and it must also be ready to serve in the community's defence from foreign injury. Political power by which the government performs these functions ought to be used only for the public good and not for private gain or advantage. Locke then set out to establish a basis for this power, a basis which he considered moral and just. He turned to a concept used by political theorists since the time of the Stoic in ancient Greece: natural law with its concomitants, the state of nature and the state of war. The state of nature has been objected to as a concept by many because history does not indicate to us such a state existed. In this treaty, Locke tries to answer this sort of objection by pointing to primitive societies known in his day, the nations of Indians living in the New World. But this is not a strong argument and was not really needed by Locke. The concept of the state of nature can be used as a device to set off and point up the difference between a civil state in which laws are enacted by the government and a contrasting state in which either these laws are absent in principle or another set of laws prevails. In this way, the basis of civil enactments and the position of the individual within society may be better understood. This applies also to other concepts mentioned: the state of war and natural law. At any rate, Locke holds that in the state of nature each man may order his own life as he sees fit, free from any restrictions that other men might impose. In this sense he and all others are equal. They are equal in a more profound sense, from which, as it were, their right to act as independent agents comes, that is, as children of God. By use of his reason, man can discover God's commands by which he should order his life in the state of nature. These commands we call the laws of nature. Thus, although one is free to act as he pleases in the state of nature, he is still obligated to act according to God's commands. This ensures that his actions, although free, will not be licentious. The basic restrictions that God's laws place upon an individual is that he treats others as he himself would like to be treated. Since men are equal and independent, they should not harm one another regarding their life, health, liberty, or possessions. Man's glory, as well as his downfall, has been free will, whereby he may choose to do or not do what he ought to do. To preserve himself from those who choose to harm him, one has the right to punish transgressors of the law. Reparation and restraint are the two reasons that justify punishment when an individual by his acts has shown that he has agreed to live by a law other than that which common reason and equity dictate. That is, he has chosen to violate God's orders. The right to punish is thus a natural right by which men, in the state of nature, may preserve themselves and mankind from the transgressions of the lawless. This right is the basis for the right of governments to punish lawbreakers within the state. Thus, Locke provides a ground for one aspect of political power which he had noted earlier. When an individual indicates through a series of acts which are apparently premeditated that he has designs on another's life or property, then he places himself in a state of war, a state of enmity and destruction towards his intended victim. In a state of nature, men ought to live according to reason and hence according to God's commands. Each man must be the judge of his own actions, for on earth he has no common superior with authority to judge between him and another when a question of aggression arises, and when relief is sought. His conscience must be his guide as to whether he and another are in a state of war. In the Declaration of Independence, the American colonists proclaimed that men had natural rights granted them by their Creator, that governments were instituted by men with their consent to protect these rights. Locke held these rights to be life, liberty, and property, whereas the Declaration proclaims them to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is interesting that Jefferson pondered whether to use property or pursuit of happiness, and in an early draft actually had the former set down. Much of Locke's discussion in his treatise influenced the statesmen and leaders of the colonies during the period of the American Revolution. Locke seems to use various senses of property in his discussions. Speaking quite generally, one might say that whatever was properly one's own, this might mean whatever God had endowed an individual with, or whatever the legislator of the Commonwealth had declared as legal possession, no one else had a claim to. In spelling out this idea, Locke starts first with one's own body, which is God-given and which no one has a claim upon. A man has a right to be secure in his person. Included in this idea, of course, is the fact that life itself is a gift to which no one else has a claim, as well as the freedom to move about without restriction. There is next the more common use of property, which is often rendered estate, and which refers to the proper possessions which one gains in working the earth that God has given man to use for the advantage of his life and its convenience. Since working for one's own advantage and convenience involves the pursuit of happiness, it can be seen in what way the terms property and the pursuit of happiness are interchangeable. The more common use of property is nonetheless related to the first use in Locke's theory. What is properly a man's own may be extended when, with regard to the common property that God has blessed men with for their use, a man mixes his labour with it and makes it his own. Divine command prescribes, however, that he takes no more than he needs, for to take more than one's share may lead to the waste of God's gift and result in want for others. Locke believed that there was more than enough land in the world for men, but that it should be used judiciously. He does complicate matters, however, by stating that disproportionate and unequal possessions may be acquired within a government through the consent of the governed. Locke's embryonic economic theory may be looked upon as an early statement of the classical or labour theory of value. This is especially so if we remember that aside from the natural or God-given articles of value that man has, he creates objects of value by means of his own labour. More succinctly, labour creates values. This view was held by such influential thinkers in economic history as Adam Smith, David Ricardo and Karl Marx. However, it is to be noted that Locke again provided a ground for the use of political power to regulate, preserve and protect property in all its aspects by establishing its place in the state of nature to the institution of the Commonwealth. Locke has shown that although men ought to live according to divine commands, some do not, and thus they turn the state of nature into one of war. Since there is no common superior on earth to whom one can turn for restitution, men are often left helpless. It is obvious that not every injury imagined is a wrong, that two individuals in conscience may disagree, and that those instances of obvious wrongs are not always rectifiable when men have only their own judgments and strength to depend upon. A disinterested judge supported by more power than a single person has alone may provide people with a remedy for the insecurity that exists in the state of nature. In the most general sense of property, a commonwealth may provide a solution to its preservation and security by making public the laws by which men ought to live, by establishing a government by which differences may be settled through the office of known and impartial judges who are authorized to do so, and by instituting a police force to execute the laws, a protection absent in the state of nature. Men give up their rights to judge for themselves and to execute the laws of nature to the Commonwealth, which in turn is obligated to use the power which it has gained for the ends which led to the transference of these rights. In giving up their rights, men consent to form a body politic under one government, and in so doing obligate themselves to every member of that society to submit to the determinations of the majority. Note that everyone who enters into the society from the state of nature must consent to do so. Hence, consent is unanimous, and anyone who does not consent is not a member of the body politic. On the other hand, once the body politic is formed, its members are thenceforth subject to the vote of the majority. In discussing consent on the general question, who has consented and what are its significant signs, Locke uses the traditional distinction between tacit and express consent, although he is somewhat ambiguous at times. His position is apparently as follows. There are two great classes or categories of individuals within society: those who are members and those who are residents but not members. A convenient and similar distinction would be those who are citizens and those who are aliens. Both these two groups receive benefits from the government and hence are obligated to obey it. By their presence they enjoy the peace and security that goes with a government of law and order, and this is morally and politically justifiable that government expect of them that they obey its laws. Those who are merely residents may quit the body politic when they please. Their tacit consent lasts only as long as their presence in the state. Members, however, by their express consent, create and perpetuate the society. They are not free to be or not be members at their whim, else the body politic would be no different from the state of nature or war from which its members emerged, and anarchy would prevail. Citizens usually have the protection of their government at home and abroad, and often, at least, in the government. Locke preferred a voice in the affairs of the nation. Locke points out, however, that the people who form the Commonwealth by their unanimous consent may also delegate their power to a few or to one, oligarchy or monarchy, but in any case it is their government. There are certain aspects of government which Locke believed must be maintained to ensure that it functions for the public good. The legislative, which is the supreme governmental power, must not use its power arbitrarily over the lives and fortunes of the people. The law of nature still prevails in the governments of men, nor should power be exercised without deliberation. Extempore acts would place the people in as great jeopardy as they were in the state of nature. The supreme power cannot take from a man his property without his consent. This applies also to taxation. The legislative power cannot be transferred to anyone else, but must remain in the hands of that group to which it was delegated by the people. In so acting, the legislator ensures that political power will be used for the public good. Locke believed that the interests of the people would be protected more fully in a government in which the three basic powers, legislative, executive, and federative, were separate and distinct in their functions. The legislature need meet only periodically, but their executive should be in a session, as it were, continually, whereas the management of the security of the Commonwealth from foreign injury would reside in the body politic as a whole. Strictly speaking, the federative power, treaty-making, and so forth need not be distinguished from the legislative. It is interesting that the three branches of government in the United States, including the judiciary rather than the federative, which is shared by the executive and legislative branches of government. This shows that Montesquieu, as well as Locke, influenced the Philadelphia Convention. Government, which is made up of three basic powers, of which the legislative is supreme, must not usurp the end for which it was established. The community, even after it has delegated its power, does not give up its right of self-preservation, and in this sense it retains forever the ultimate power of sovereignty. This power cannot be used by the community which is under obligation to obey the acts of the government unless that government is dissolved. It must be pointed out that the community is for Locke an important political concept. The exercise of its power after the dissolution of government is as a public body and does not involve a general return to the state of nature or war by its members. But in what way is a government dissolved? When a government exercises power beyond right, when public power is used for private gain, then tyranny prevails. Such act sets the stage for the dissolution of government. It should be pointed out that in forming a community and in delegating power to a government, the people, especially in the latter case, enter into an agreement or analogously into a social contract with their government to provide them with security, preservation, and those conveniences that they desire in exchange for the transference of their rights and the honour, respect, and obligation which they render to the government. The violation of their part of the contract leads government to declare them as individuals, outlaws, to use its police force to subdue them, and its courts to set punishment for them. In discussing dissolution in general, Locke points out that it can apply to societies and communities as well as to governments. It is seldom that a community is dissolved. If it does happen, it is usually the result of a foreign invasion, which is followed by the utter destruction of the society. Governments, on the other hand, are dissolved from within. Either the executive abandons his office, as was done by James II, and the laws cannot be carried out, or the legislative power is affected in various ways which indicate a violation of trust. If, for example, the property of the subjects is invaded, or if power is used arbitrarily, then government is dissolved. Obviously, it falls upon the community to judge when this power is being abused. Generally, Locke holds that people are slow to act. It takes not merely one or two, but a long series of abuses to lead them to revolution. In fact, he points out that the term rebellion indicates a return to a state of war, and the denial of the principles of civil society. But when this happens in a dissolution of government, it is the government that has rebelled, and not the community. It is the community that stands for law and order and puts down the rebellion. Thus Locke rather cleverly concludes that his treatise, not with the justification of the right of rebellion, but rather with the right of the people to put down unlawful government, unlawful in that it violates the trust and the laws of nature, leading to tyranny, rebellion, and dissolution.